"You're the biggest mistake this family ever made." Greg Dalton said it without flinching, as if he were delivering a routine fact rather than detonating a bomb in the middle of his daughter's already shattered day. His voice carried no anger, no hesitation, just the cold finality of someone who had decided long ago that Mira was disposable. Rain hammered down on the quiet suburban street behind her, soaking through her thin blouse until it clung to her skin like a second, colder layer. Mira stood frozen on the doorstep, shivering not just from the weather, but from the weight of the past few hours crashing over her. Just that morning, she'd been called into her manager's office. The expression on his face had told her everything before he even spoke. They were cutting staff. Her name was on the list, not because she'd made a mistake, but because a jealous co-worker had sabotaged her reports at the worst possible moment. Mira had spent years giving that company her best, often staying late, skipping breaks, and filling in quietly for others. And this was how it ended. She hadn't argued. She hadn't fought. She simply packed her things, walked out, and got into her car with a hollow ache spreading through her chest. And then she'd made the most naive choice of her adult life. She drove home hoping for comfort, hoping for a moment of warmth, hoping, childishly, foolishly, that her family would finally be there for her. But the Dalton family had never been that kind of family. Greg's eyes bored into her like twin drills as she stood there dripping onto the welcome mat. When she tried to explain what happened, her voice small, her words shaky, he didn't listen. He didn't even pretend. He simply repeated himself, slower this time, as if making sure the wound sank deeper. "You are a mistake." Before Mira could process the blow, Vivian Dalton appeared behind him. Her mother came out carrying an armful of Myra's clothes, bags, and personal belongings. Without a word, she tossed everything off the porch and into the muddy front yard where rainwater pooled around the grass. "Get your things off our lawn," Vivian snapped. "You don't belong here. Not anymore." Those words hit harder than Greg's insult. Mira had spent her entire life trying to earn even a sliver of maternal affection. But affection was something Vivian offered only to Chloe, never to her. A sudden ding chimed from the doorway. Mira looked up. Chloe was standing there with her phone out, already recording. Her face lit with amusement, as if the misery unfolding in front of her was the best content she'd captured all week. "Family drama," Chloe said into her live stream, smirking. "Don't worry, guys, she totally brought this on herself." Then she looked directly at her sister. "By the way," she said with casual cruelty, "you still need to pay my car loan this month. Losing your job doesn't change the fact you made a commitment." Mira didn't know how long she stood there. Rain blurred her vision, but she wasn't crying. Not yet. Not while they were watching. Everything around her, Greg's glare, Vivian's disgust, Chloe's mocking laughter, felt distant, muffled, like she was underwater. Eventually, Mira forced herself to bend down and gather her belongings. Her clothes, her documents, a few old notebooks, a faded childhood photograph she didn't even remember packing. All of it soaked, ruined, stamped into the mud by the downpour. When she reached for the last item, the front door slammed shut with a hard, final click. It wasn't loud, but it echoed through her like a verdict. She moved mechanically, loading the soggy mess into the trunk of her car. Each movement felt heavy, as if her limbs didn't quite belong to her. When she finally sank into the driver's seat, the quiet inside the car hit her harder than the shouting outside. The rain pounded against the roof in relentless rhythm. Her phone buzzed. A notification. From Chloe's video. "Your video has reached 1,204 views." Myra's breath halted. She tapped the screen with trembling fingers. There she was, captured in high definition, standing helplessly in the rain while Chloe laughed behind the camera. The comments scrolled rapidly. What did she do? "This is wild LOL. LMAO the drama." No one saw her as a person. Just entertainment. Mira watched the video a second time. And a third. Each viewing carved out another piece of her already hollow chest. But the strangest part wasn't the humiliation. She was used to that. It was the silence inside her. The absence of anger. The absence of tears. Just an empty space, cold and vast. The same space she'd carried since childhood. She leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. Memories rose up, slow and heavy. Birthday candles blown out without her. School achievements ignored. Her allowance ceased to pay for Chloe's dance lessons. The endless comparisons, the relentless blame, the quiet wish, every day, that maybe tomorrow they'd see her differently. But they never did. And they never would. Mira opened her eyes again. The phone's reflection glowed faintly in the dark interior of the car. They didn't know the truth. Not Greg. Not Vivian. Not Chloe. They had no idea that Mira wasn't the helpless loser they thought she was. They didn't know she had savings, investments, properties, a career outside their vision, a life they'd never been part of. But none of that mattered right now, because the one thing she had never been able to buy was family. She drew in a long breath, wiped the rain off her face, and turned the key in the ignition. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Mira drove through the rain for a long time without seeing anything beyond the blur on her windshield. The hurt from the front porch lingered in her chest like a bruise that hadn't formed yet. And as the miles stretched ahead, memories she had spent years locking away began to surface, quiet at first, then insistent, then overwhelming. She knew, deep down, that what happened today wasn't a beginning. It was a continuation, a pattern, a cycle, one that started long before adulthood. Myra's earliest memories in the Dalton household were always split into two categories, the things done for Chloe, and the things done because of Mira. Chloe's half-birthdays were legendary in the neighborhood, lavish decorations, dozens of cupcakes, themed parties complete with rented bounce houses or petting zoos. Meanwhile, Myra's real birthdays often slipped by unnoticed. Some years, no one remembered until dinner, and even then the acknowledgement was little more than an afterthought. A late, "Oh, right. Happy birthday, Mira," spoken without looking up from a phone. When she brought home straight A's, the response was a distracted, "That's good." While Chloe was celebrated for passing a class she nearly failed. Photos of Chloe's tiny achievements were framed and displayed. Myra's awards ended up stacked in drawers, never mentioned. It wasn't jealousy Mira felt back then. It was confusion. Confusion that slowly grew into resignation. Resignation that eventually hardened into silence. She learned early that being quiet kept the peace. Being useful kept her safe. Being invisible kept her from becoming a target. But even invisibility had a price. Money was always an issue in the Dalton home. At least, that's what they told Mira whenever she asked to buy something for herself. "We can't afford that," Vivian would snap. Even though the same week Chloe got a new pair of designer sneakers or a pricey dance class. By the time Mira was 13, she had a part-time job bagging groceries. She worked after school, on weekends, during holidays, and saved every dollar in a small metal tin under her bed. She dreamed of using it to apply to a summer writing program or maybe buy a used laptop. But the tin disappeared one morning. Vivian told her, flatly, "Chloe needs new cheer uniforms. Family helps each other. That money wasn't yours alone." Mira said nothing. She'd already learned that speaking up only made things worse. Over the years, blame became a familiar companion. If Chloe broke something, Mira was told to apologize. If chore lists were uneven, Mira was told to take initiative. If Chloe cried, Vivian demanded to know what Mira had done. The worst came when Mira received a full college scholarship at 17. She'd worked for it, sacrificed sleep for it, believed, naively, that this would finally earn her parents' respect. Instead, Vivian slapped her across the face. "You think you can just leave this family? After everything we've given you?" Mira stood there, stunned, cheek burning. "You're staying right here," Vivian declared. "We need the help. You can go to college later, if you prove you deserve it." That night, Mira packed a bag and left. No one stopped her. No one followed. By morning, they hadn't even filed a missing person report. She realized then, truly realized, that she had never been a daughter in that house. Only a placeholder. A tool. A scapegoat. She spent the next few days at a youth shelter downtown, sleeping on a thin mattress that creaked whenever she turned. She had no plan, no direction, and almost no money. But for the first time in her life, she felt real freedom. Fragile, uncertain, but real. And that was where she met Edward Hale. He wasn't a man who blended in. He had the bearing of someone who'd seen too much, broad shoulders, tired eyes, and a quiet presence that commanded respect without ever asking for it. Edward volunteered at the shelter, often bringing warm meals or teaching basic skills to the teens staying there. He noticed Mira on her third day, not because she drew attention, she didn't, but because she tried so hard not to. You look like someone who's used to doing everything alone, he told her gently. She didn't respond, but he didn't push. Instead, he offered her a small job helping organize supplies. It wasn't much, but it gave her structure, a routine, and, most importantly, a sense of purpose. Over the weeks, Edward became the closest thing to a mentor she ever had. He taught her how to budget, how to apply for work, how to negotiate with confidence. He saw potential in her long before she did. "You're stronger than you think, kid," he would say. Some people get knocked down so many times they forget how dangerous they become when they finally stand up. Eventually, he revealed a truth Mira never expected. He had served in the military with her biological father, a man Mira had only blurry memories of. According to Edward, her father made him promise one thing before deployment. "If I don't come back, make sure my daughter grows up safe." Edward had spent years searching for her, and now that he'd found her, he wasn't letting her fall through the cracks. For the first time, Mira felt what stability felt like, what support felt like, what being cared for without conditions felt like. It didn't last forever. Edward passed away quietly in his sleep a few years later. His lawyer handed Mira a will. Everything he owned was left to her. Alongside it was a small metal box with a single sentence etched into the lid: "Open only when they come back." She didn't understand what it meant then, but she would, sooner than she expected. The day Mira buried Edward Hale, the world felt strangely quiet. Not empty, quiet. It wasn't the silence of loss. It was the silence that comes right before something powerful begins. Edward had given her more than a roof, more than kindness. He had given her the tools to build a life far beyond the one she had escaped. She made a promise at his graveside. A simple one: "I won't waste what you gave me." And she didn't. When the attorney finished sorting Edward's will, Mira found herself in possession of assets that would have overwhelmed most people her age: commercial lots, 2 small trucking depots, and a collection of financial accounts that Edward had grown quietly over decades. Most would have sold everything and started over somewhere warm, somewhere easy. But Mira had never grown up with easy. She didn't crave comfort. She craved control. She studied Edward's old notebooks, business records, and contracts late into the night, day after day, until the logic of the trucking world started to click. She learned routes, fuel costs, freight demand cycles. She learned which companies paid fast and which tried to stall payments. She learned to negotiate like someone with nothing to lose. Within a year, she revived Edward's small trucking operation and expanded it. New trucks, better routes, reliable drivers who respected her because she treated them with fairness she had never received herself. Within 3 years, Mira Dalton was no longer a girl trying to survive. She was a business owner with a reputation for precision and grit. And trucking was only the beginning. Edward had also left her a folder of real estate records. Old houses he had bought cheaply after the recession. Land parcels that looked worthless on paper, but came with hidden potential. Mira dove into real estate with the same hunger she had brought to trucking. She renovated rundown duplexes, flipped aging homes, and rented out properties to families who needed someone who treated them like human beings. She put her profits into new investments, carefully, methodically, never impulsively. The crown jewel of her portfolio came unexpectedly, a neglected stretch of coastal land in North Carolina. Local developers dismissed it as too eroded, too wild, too risky. Mira saw something different. She saw what Edward had seen, a future no one else cared to imagine. Years later, that same land would be valued at several $1,000,000. Still, she remained quiet about her success. She didn't brag, didn't post, didn't return to the Daltons with her accomplishments in hand. Success, to Mira, wasn't a weapon. Not yet. It wasn't until she revisited the metal box Edward left her, the one engraved with the words, "Open only when they come back," that she learned what he had always kept hidden. Inside were papers, government papers, documents stamped with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs seal. And as she read them, her hands began to shake. For more than a decade, Greg and Vivian Dalton had been receiving survivor benefits meant for Mira, the money her father had intended for her education, her safety, her future. But the Daltons had forged signatures. They had diverted every cent. Not $1 had gone to Mira. They used the money to pay for Chloe's sports teams, for vacations, for new appliances, for every luxury they claimed the family needed. They'd stolen her chance at college, at stability, at a life without struggle. It wasn't just neglect. It was theft. A theft so deep it rewrote the trajectory of Myra's entire life. She sat alone in her office that night, papers scattered around her, and let the truth settle like ash around her. They hadn't simply preferred Chloe. They hadn't simply ignored her. They had taken the future her father died trying to provide. But Myra didn't scream, didn't break anything, didn't vow revenge. She just continued working. The best retaliation was success they would never benefit from. Time moved forward. Myra grew. Stronger, richer, steadier. Her businesses flourished. Her properties multiplied. The name Myra Dalton became quietly respected in industries dominated by louder, older men. And while she rose, silently, steadily, the house she once fled began to collapse from within. Greg Dalton was fired after an internal audit uncovered financial irregularities. Vivian drowned herself in credit card debt trying to maintain the lifestyle she no longer had access to. Chloe's influencer aspirations crashed after a lawsuit over unpaid sponsorships and fraudulent product claims. One by one, the pillars of the Dalton household crumbled. And when desperation reached its peak, they did what Myra always knew they eventually would. They came looking for her. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Myra was reviewing logistics reports when she heard a frantic pounding at her door. She opened it slowly. There they were. Greg, older, heavier, defeated. Vivian, makeup smeared, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Chloe, dressed in designer clothes she clearly couldn't afford anymore. They pushed past her without invitation, stumbling into the foyer of her coastal home. Myra, we need your help, Vivian blurted out. We're family, and family takes care of each other. Greg added, you owe us everything you have. You only got it because we raised you. Chloe crossed her arms. You have money. A lot of money. The least you can do is help your own blood. Myra stood still, expression unreadable. They had no idea who she had become. No idea what she knew. No idea that she had spent years preparing for this exact moment. When they finished talking, begging, demanding, manipulating, Myra spoke with the calm authority of someone who no longer feared them. Come back in 3 days, she said softly. We'll talk then. Her voice carried no anger, just certainty, and the echo of a storm they never saw coming. 3 days passed with a stillness that felt almost rehearsed. Myra lived her life as usual, meetings, calls, logistics running in the background, but beneath her steady pace, something colder and sharper waited. She knew they would return. She knew desperation made people predictable, and she knew, better than anyone, that the Daltons had never faced consequences. Until now. When the doorbell finally rang, there was no surprise on her face. Only clarity. Greg, Vivian, and Chloe stood on her front porch looking worn, desperate, and smaller than she remembered. They weren't storming into her home this time. They were hovering at the entrance like people who could sense they were walking toward their own reckoning. Myra opened the door slowly. Come in, she said. Her voice gave away nothing. As they stepped inside, their eyes darted around. Cameras blinked softly from the corners of the room. A man in a dark suit sat at the dining table with a laptop and several neatly stacked folders. Vivian stiffened. Who is he? My attorney, Myra answered. He's here for transparency. Greg swallowed hard. Chloe frowned, confused. Myra took her seat at the head of the table, posture straight, gaze calm. Let's begin, she said. She opened the first folder. The rustle of paper was loud in the quiet room. These, she continued, are the documents you forged to claim military survivor benefits under my father's name. Greg choked on air. Myra. Wait. We can explain. She held up a hand. Don't interrupt. Her attorney clicked a button, and documents appeared on a large screen. Signatures, payment logs, government approvals. The evidence was undeniable. Vivian paled. Myra. Honey, we didn't know. You didn't know? Myra repeated softly. You applied in my name. You forged my signature. You used my father's death to fund Chloe's hobbies and your lifestyle. Chloe scoffed instinctively. That's not my fault. I didn't sign anything. Myra clicked to the next document. Maybe not, but you benefited from it. Private lessons, uniforms, trips, all paid with money meant for me. Chloe's face twisted. I didn't ask for that. You're blaming me for something I didn't even know about. Myra looked at her, really looked at her, without anger, without sympathy, Just the plain truth. You knew enough to mock me. Enough to take from me. Enough to believe you were owed more than I ever had. Chloe's voice cracked. This is your chance to do the right thing. To help us. The right thing. Mira repeated. After you posted videos of me being thrown out? After you laughed while I stood in the rain? Chloe's bravado fractured. Tears welled up. I didn't mean for it to go that far. Greg broke in, panic rising. Mira, sweetheart, think rationally. Your mother and I, we made mistakes. But we're family. You wouldn't destroy your own family. Mira turned to her attorney. Play the recordings. The cameras in the hallway lit up. The room filled with the sound of the Daltons' voices from 3 days prior. Every demand, every accusation, every claim that she owed them something. Their own words boxed them in. When the recording ended, silence settled over the room like frost. Mira folded her hands. Her voice was steady. I am not suing you, she said. Vivian exhaled in relief, shoulders slumping. But, Mira continued, I will not protect you either. Vivian froze. Greg blinked rapidly. Chloe's jaw dropped. Mira leaned forward slightly. I've already submitted the documents to the Department of Veterans Affairs. The investigation has begun. The room erupted. Greg slammed a fist on the table. You reported your own parents. How could you do that? Vivian's voice broke into a trembling wail. Mira, please. They'll take everything. We'll lose the house. You know we can't survive without it. Chloe shook her head violently, mascara streaking. You're ruining our lives. You want us homeless. You want me bankrupt. Mira didn't raise her voice. She simply said, you ruined your own lives. I'm just refusing to carry the weight of your actions. Tears streamed down Vivian's face. We're begging you. Please. We're your family. Mira stood up slowly. She didn't look angry. She didn't look triumphant. She looked resolved. For years, she said quietly, I begged for love. For respect. For a chance. You gave me nothing. And I still tried to become someone you could be proud of. She walked toward the front door. But I will not return to the hole you pushed me into. She opened the door. Cold air swept into the room. Greg stepped forward. Mira, please, we're sorry. We'll change. We'll do anything. Mira turned her head slightly. Not enough to seem moved. Not enough to seem cruel. I worked for years to build this life, she said. And I will not climb back down just because you finally understand the consequences. She gestured gently toward the open doorway. It's time for you to go. One by one, they walked out, broken, sobbing, stunned. Chloe couldn't even meet her eyes. Vivian kept muttering apologies that came too late. Greg looked older than ever. Mira watched them step into the fading sun. Then she closed the door. The click of the lock was soft, but final. Later that evening, she walked onto her balcony overlooking the ocean. The waves rolled in steady, endless, peaceful. For the first time in her life, Mira felt a quiet that wasn't born of fear or emptiness. It was the quiet of freedom. Not revenge. Not triumph. Just truth settling into place. She whispered to the wind. Not bitterly, not proudly, just honestly. I didn't destroy them. I simply let the truth do its job. And with that, Mira stepped back inside, ready for the life she had built herself. Strong, untouchable, and finally her own.